Hello, I'm Ben Hunt, the BBC's LGBT correspondent, and I'm very excited to welcome you to this Pride Inside discussion on the UK's role in supporting LGBTI human rights defenders, or HRDs. We're having this discussion to address the alarming levels of repression, discrimination, abuse, and killings that all types of HRDs are facing in every region of the world. Pride Inside launched at the weekend on the day of the Stonewall riots, which showed the world acts of resistance led by the Black and Brown LGBTI plus community against police raids and police brutality. They sparked a revolution in LGBTI plus activism and civil rights. This riot and subsequent protests paved the way for the Pride celebrations that we know today. Pride Inside will run over 2 weeks and is filled with amazing music, drag performances, workshops, and much, much more. Make sure you check out the full program online. So tonight, we are joined by a fantastic group of panelists, some of whom are UK parliamentarians and members of the all-party Parliamentary group on global LGBT plus rights. So we've also got some people on the front lines working as LGBTI human rights defenders, and I'm going to ask them to all introduce themselves. We're going to begin with Crispin Blunt MP. Hey, Crispin.
Hi, Ben. I'm Crispin Blunt. I'm the Member of Parliament for Reigate, and I chair the all-party parliamentary group for global LGBT plus rights. It's a cause very close to my heart because in some ways I regard it as payback for the freedom I had to come out in 2010, where a lot of very brave activists in the UK in the decades beforehand had paid with their careers, their liberty, and very occasionally their lives in order to deliver the freedom that I enjoyed to come out without any particular problems in 2010. And the work that the group does, I hope, helps me pay back to people in other parts of the world where homosexuality remains criminalized and LGBT plus people remain under oppression, that we can do some help to improve their situation and support the human rights defenders in those parts of the world.
Thank you so much. Okay, cool. Over to Baroness Barker. Hello.
I'm coming to you from Wimbledon. It's very exciting. And normally these 2 weeks of the year, the most famous lesbians in Wimbledon are Martina and Billie Jean King. But today it's me. And I'm really happy to be taking part in this. Like Crispin, I was somebody who wasn't able to come out publicly until quite late on, although I did a lot of work behind the scenes. And I now use my position in Parliament and the influence that I have to make up for that and to stick up for people all around the world who don't enjoy the same freedom that I do.
Thank you so much. Welcome. And we're going to go to Katsiaryna Borsuk now.
Thanks, Ben, and good evening, everyone. My name is Katsiaryna Borsuk, and I'm Belarusian LGBT plus rights defender since 10 years, probably. And at the moment, I'm one of the organizing committee member of 2020 Belarus Pride Week.
Awesome stuff. Thank you so much. Next, we are going to go to Magdalena Świder. Hello.
Hello, everyone. Hello, Ben. Hello, everyone. I'm part of Advocacy and Policy team of Campaign Against Homophobia, which is the biggest LGBTI organization in Poland.
Nice, thank you. And I'm also going to introduce us to the very fabulous Max, who'll be interpreting tonight's show for us. Thank you, Max, appreciate it. Okay, cool. So, intro's done. We are so privileged to have two fantastic activists and human rights defenders with us tonight. And we want to give the floor to them to start and give us a background of the situation for LGBTI HRDs globally. And in particular, because they're from these places, the situations in Poland and Belarus. I first invite Katsiaryna to start off with some context on the situation globally and some of the mechanisms in place that should be protecting LGBTI defenders, as well as her experience from Belarus.
Thanks, Ben. Yeah, indeed. I think starting with international and probably regional and a little bit with national mechanisms that protect human rights defenders is a really nice idea, and it's probably going to be the only positive thing that I'm going to share with you tonight. But anyway, something to be proud of, and indeed. Just imagine, in a span of only 20 years, we as advocates managed to establish an international system that recognize not only the rights of LGBT plus people, but the right of human rights defenders who promote and try to defend them. And it's a lot. Just a very brief reminder to everyone in case we are joined by those who are just new to this field. The Declaration on Human Rights Defenders was introduced in 1998, and just in 2 years we already been pleased with establishment of special rapporteur on human rights defenders. I also have to acknowledge the development of Jakarta Principles plus 10 that been followed by a very explicit recognition of the vulnerability of human rights defenders who work on the rights of LGBT people, and not only, also on the rights of women and the rights of indigenous people, for example. And that acknowledgement came up only in 2008. And already in 2016, we've been celebrating the establishment of independent expert on SOGI, which is really amazing. And that development is quite important to understand how the international, regional, as well as national mechanisms for the protection of human rights defenders being developed. First, we had this Declaration on Human Rights Defenders, and a number of regional mechanisms being established, such as Inter-American Commission on Human Rights that has a specific unit on human rights defenders, African Commission on Human Rights that also have a special rapporteur on African human rights defenders, and so-called Kampala Action Kampala Action Plan that explicitly recognized the work of human rights defenders on the promotion of LGBT plus rights. In Europe, we have a Council of Europe with its Charter and Declaration on Human Rights, as well as EU guidelines on human rights defenders. Apart from that, we also have Office for Democratic Institutions and Human Rights, who systematically monitor the situation with human rights defenders in Europe. We have EU focal points that also focus on the same issue. With Asia, unfortunately, I can't highlight a great success in recognizing the protection of human rights defenders, but nonetheless, there is Asian Human Rights Commission as well, and hopefully in the years followed, the recognition of the work of human rights defenders, including those working on LGBT rights, will be advanced as well. And based on this regional framework, we also have some progress on the national level. For example, in South America, we have a number of states that have national programs, policies, mandates, and offices that are dedicated to protect human rights defenders. Some states even push for laws that would protect human rights defenders. The same we have in Africa. Several African countries have similar mandates and similar programs, and already introduced laws that would protect human rights defenders, such as in Niger, Burkina Faso, Cote d'Ivoire. Of course, whether they are effective or not is a question for debate. Definitely, there are some issues related to the enforcement, budgetary limitations, autonomy. They are not very open for the collaboration with civil society and human rights defenders. So there is a lot to be done to improve the systems in place. in EU, if so, not just EU, but Europe and the UK, their legal systems are quite robust because they are based on those regional human rights standards and mechanisms that are already in place. And they usually, EU and the UK, rather committed to the protection and recognition of the work of human rights defenders, including LGBT+, but not all of them. And I think my colleague Magda will say a couple of words on how it's happening in Poland, for example. There are also those states, and they are in majority, who can't enjoy the exercise of these mechanisms, unfortunately, especially those on regional and national levels. And for example, my country is one of those. We are not part of Council of Europe. The only mechanism applicable in our relation is Declaration on Human Rights Defenders and special reports on human rights defenders. But sometimes it's already enough. And so coming to the national level, I just want to acknowledge that in some states the legal system is a shield, whereas in other countries the legal system is a sword for human rights defenders, unfortunately. And the fact that there are already some protective measures and state recognition of the work of human rights is really important, especially for LGBT plus rights defenders, because, for example, based on my experience, it was always the case to prove the point that I'm not only LGBT person myself or queer person, I'm also human rights defender, and I'm entitled to all those strategies and actions and protection as anybody else working on human rights promotion and protection. But that's not like always clear to everyone. And unfortunately, to the states similar to the one that I'm coming from, those that are authoritarian, or those who are in transition to democracies, or even worse, those who are at the moment in some sort of armed conflicts, like Ukraine, for example, where the protection of human rights defenders is very questionable. While working in my country, as I already mentioned, I've been, as a human rights defender, always questioned about protecting LGBT rights. And sometimes I even question myself whether it's my identity or the fact that I am human rights defenders that trigger such a negative reaction from the side of states, and not only state, but civil society, some of the actors of civil society as well. And pride is probably one of the way for us to check the ground and see whether civil society is inclusive of our agenda and ready to support us when we are oppressed, and whether the government is still as hostile as it was like a couple of years ago. So strategies such as pride are quite important for us, even though they are very questionable and criticized by many other activists. For example, in my country at the moment, we have a rather disturbing political and civil unrest. We have a presidential election coming up in August, and if in March we had only one political prisoner, now we have 19, and all of them somehow related to campaigning, political campaigning. They're journalists, they're bloggers, and we are thinking to hold our pride in September in such a difficult environment. Is going to be definitely difficult, and we will be criticized for the fact that we are going in dissonance with the civil and political struggles of others. And my point with that regard is that we are not in dissonance, and there is no more prioritized issues to be working on. We will be standing up anyway, regardless of the situation in the country, regardless who is going to be in the power. And and trying to silencing us is not the right strategy when it comes to human rights promotion and protection. And that's probably one of the reasons we are thinking to go ahead with the Pride in September, regardless of any political and civil turbulences that are probably going to rise. Thank you very much.
Apparently that did not work. I don't know why the system automatically muted me, but we're going to keep on going anyway. So thank you so much for that. Really, really appreciate it. And we're going to pass over to Magdalena now to hear all about her experiences in Poland. I'm very excited about this one because I've got a documentary all about LGBT rights in Poland coming out next week, which has been held up thanks to the electoral rights and laws that have been happening in Poland over the past few weeks. So yes, I'm very excited to hear about this, Magdalena. So over to you, please.
Okay, so let me start by saying that we're very lucky because unlike human rights defenders in countries such as Belarus, Turkey, or Russia, we are not actually at physical threat or a threat of being put in jail because of our actions. However, we are all very tired and we're all very intimidated because of the actions undertaken by very powerful social institutions such as state-controlled media or the politicians in power, such as the president, during this election campaign. I would like to tell you about why ILGA Europe, which is an umbrella organization for LGBTI organizations across Europe, have decided to take away a point for human rights defenders being at risk for their ranking rainbow map for 2019. And one of the reasons was that we are facing currently in Poland strong propaganda by Polish public TV, which is actually funded from public funds. And what they have done 2 days before parliamentary elections last year, they have run this documentary called Invasion, where they actually recorded 2 of our internal meetings because they sent a volunteer, a journalist faking to be a volunteer, when she recorded our meetings. And the documentary basically portrayed both LGBT activists and as sex offenders, pedophiles, as the ones that want to destroy Polish culture and Polish tradition and Polish family. And what was really scary is that they not only recorded the formal meetings, but also informal meetings of our volunteers who are not always outed. So we were really afraid what they're going to show. And they did show, did they, for instance, say that we're paying people to go to Pride marches, that we're sending buses of people. It was a complete propaganda. It was very difficult. We're now going to take this case to a court, but according to because of the judiciary reform that our government did, we don't really know if we're going to be really treated seriously. So that was one of the cases, and it was just one of the series of materials portraying LGBT activists as sex offenders, pedophiles, and those who want to destroy Polish culture. But also we've seen other important social institutions that are also employed to defend or to attack LGBT activists. For instance, Elżbieta Podleśna, she's a human rights activist. She was arrested and detained last year because she had posters of Virgin Mary with a halo around her head and the colors of rainbow flag. So we see that was really an excessive force by the police. But also, since we had so many Pride marches last year, there were many instances that the police were stopping people when they had Polish symbols like a Polish flag or the Polish eagle with an element of a rainbow flag. Because according to them, this was desecrating national symbols. So we've seen all of these instances of excessive force used towards human rights defenders in Poland, and this is why ILGA decided to take away a point. But of course, except for this, these things, what we're experiencing for the past 2 years around election time is intensification of hate speech towards LGBT people, and people in power, both members of the parliament, but also the president of Poland, who's saying that LGBT are not people, it's an ideology. We actually see every time that they speak like this, we see people beaten up in the streets more often. And this is really scary because dehumanization is a real thing. How it works is that people kind of loosen their restraints on moral norms, and they just are eager to attack. So we directly see the hate speech by the politicians affecting community in the streets. Apart from this, LGBT-free zones at the local governments are taken up by taking up anti-LGBT resolutions or local family charters that basically that require the local government not to put any funds towards organizations that would undermine the idea of marriage as a man and a woman. And all of these things made us really, really tired. And I think what showcases this is that out of 12 people in our team in KPH, 5 in the past few months had to take a leave due to the burnout or because of the exposure to hate speech. So I think this is really hard for us because on one hand, we just have those very important social institutions and very important people in power who are attacking, very involved in attacking LGBT community. But then again, when there's so much hate towards the community, it's actually, you also hear the attacks from within the community. For instance, just to give an example, we had a Pride month. So every day we posted something on our social media. We posted video with members of LGBT community talking about their identities. And one of the videos was of a drag queen. And we got a lot of comments, negative comments especially from gay community and people who said, well, don't show not normal people because they will attack us more. So I mean, from a social psychology point of view, this is pretty understandable because it's easier to turn against smaller community within small community rather than turn against the majority. But that means for us that we're being attacked from both sides sometimes. This is difficult.
Yeah, I mean, it sounds difficult. It's that is wild. But thank you so much for doing the work that you do, both of you. I think it's incredible. The point that you raised about people being called paedophiles is very interesting to me because as part of this documentary, I was stood outside of a church speaking to Polish people about their thoughts around homosexuality and LGBT so-called ideology, and I was called a paedophile about 5 different times. So. Yes, solidarity with that. Goodness. Onwards, we are now going to go into we're going to bring in our parliamentarians. Okay, cool. Here we go. So I'm going to welcome back Crispin Blunt MP and Baroness Barker. Let's see if they pop up. Let's have a look. Any with us? No. Oh, here we go. Hello. How you both doing? You good?
Fine.
Awesome. Good. Okay, so I'm going to kick off. Oh, can you not hear me, Crispin? You good? Okay, I'm going to ask a question to Baroness Barker to begin with then.
Okay.
How do we ensure the voices of minorities within minorities, such as lesbians, bisexuals, trans women, intersex people, remain at the center of the important conversation and action in everything that we're talking about today?
I think what we have to do is to find a way within our community to let each of the initials talk to the other with respect and respect about our differences, but that we need to do that whilst at the same time maintaining a common front against our external enemies. And one of the things which bothers me most of all is the campaign that's being waged at the moment to try to split off LGBT people from our trans allies. I think it's a quite deliberate divide and rule. And I'm very sad that some people in our community have fallen for that trick, because if they come after one of us, they come after all of us. So we need to be standing very much in solidarity with each other. Sometimes we have to remember that the more visible a person is, the more vulnerable they are. And so what we have to do, those of us who is maybe slightly less vulnerable, or sometimes may have a bit more privilege because of our color or whatever, we have to be prepared to stand up and to do as the people who came before us did. Be brave in all sorts of everyday situations, because we are only going to succeed when the people who hate us, homosexuality or pedophilia, but they see us as individual people in their families, in their communities, and we are nothing to be frightened of.
Love that. Thank you so much for that answer. Crispin, can you hear me? Are we back with you? No? Okay. Baroness Barker, I'm going to come back to you. Again, another question for you. So,
okay.
If I look at the global situation, I mean, my family is from Guyana in South America, which I believe is one of the only country, well, it's the only country in the Americas where it's still illegal to be gay. And aside from that, I studied in Malaysia for 4 years, where there is still a side of Sharia law around sexuality, and especially homosexuality. I wonder if you could talk about any particular countries or regions that you are particularly concerned about, maybe you've got any personal connection to them, and what can parliamentarians and the UK government do?
Well, it's an interesting question. I think I would say I'm worried about two countries in particular, or two areas. One is Russia, Eastern Europe, and the Middle East, that whole area in which they're countries in which religion and nationhood are deployed as weapons. Weapons of oppression against women and against all sorts of minorities, and that includes us. And I think the presentations from Katsiaryna and Magdalena said that far more eloquently than I could. The other country which I am really bothered about is America. Because I see LGBT rights coming under, and particularly trans rights, coming under sustained attack by an evangelical, right-wing, very well-funded, ruthlessly organised campaign. And I see our rights being compromised and going backwards. America should be a force for good in the world, and there are good Americans in the world, but America as a nation should be a force for good and progression, and it's not. I did happen to do an event for the Victory Institute in Washington the other day, and they were asking me about, quite rightly, about Britain's colonial past. And a lot of our colonial past was awful. We left a terrible, horrible legislative seen in many of those countries where like you say, like Guyana, where it's still illegal because of the laws that we left. But I think we've tried, or we're starting to try to address that by some of the actions of the UK government and also a lot of civil society organisations in which we here try to give people resources, experience, and so on. But I think I'm more worried about America's evangelical present than I am about our colonial past right now.
Deep. Thank you so much for that. I'm going to see if Crispin is there and ready to answer some questions. Crispin, you ready?
I think so, yes. I can now hear the program again.
Awesome.
Oh, what a relief.
Okay.
Well, perhaps
Thank
not,
you.
we'll see.
Okay, so the first question to you is going to be, what role can the APPG play in supporting LGBTI rights, human rights globally?
Well, I tend to be an optimist, and when I look at a glass, I see it as half full rather than half empty. And I think we've got a great opportunity because we've just elected in December 2019 the gayest parliament in the world. I'm told there may be some competition from New Zealand for that honour, but there will be certainly more gay MPs in the British Parliament than there are there because we're a much larger parliament. And with over 50 out colleagues in the House of Commons, as well as wonderful people like Liz Barker in the House of Lords, we've got the opportunity to mobilise as a parliament, to reach out across the world to all those activists in parts of the world, particularly those that inherited British laws when they became independent, and in the succeeding 60 odd years haven't addressed the legislative inheritance. And we're in a place to make the argument, to look our parliamentary colleagues in the eye in those countries and say, there's one basic thing you need to understand. Sexuality isn't a choice, it's inherent. And once you get that, you have the same responsibility to represent all of your constituents that we do. And you have to offer the proper protections and rights to minorities. And indeed, you need to think about that your country is going to, at some point, go on exactly the same journey that we've been on, where instead of seeing difference as some kind of threat, we will get to a point where we are celebrating difference, as we do in now, I think, pretty much in Britain. There will be isolated pockets that don't, but pretty much we're now moving to a point where we've gained our rights, we've gone beyond acceptance, and now it's a much greater celebration of the fact that we are a vibrant, live part of British society. That's obviously the wonderful part of pride. And we can take that message to our parliamentary colleagues. We can go and support the LGBT plus activists in those countries who are doing great work in very difficult circumstances, and we can make the connections for them and make sure that our embassies and our high commissions are doing a proper job promoting British human rights policy to support people in those countries. So I'm optimistic about the role that we can do, and we can sustain progress. This is now a terribly important part of the policies of all the political parties in the UK, and so it's something we can unite around.
Awesome. Well, thank you for that positivity. I like that a lot. I'm going to ask you another question just to flag to our audience as well that they can ask some questions themselves. There's going to be a Q&A portion just after this that I ask you now. So feel free to write in, I believe there's like a Facebook chat box or wherever you're watching this, just write something and someone will see it somewhere. So Crispin, another question for you. Many LGBTI human rights defenders must flee from their homes because of persecution for the work that they do. I mean, we were a part of that conversation around Chechnya just last week. Yeah. What role do you think the UK should play in resettling LGBTI human rights defenders?
Of course, we should be proud of the fact that we ought to be giving asylum to these people, that we have significantly improved over the course of the last decade the handling of LGBTI asylum seekers. Now there is further work to do, and there's I want to see progress that people don't have to establish their sexuality in any way at all. It should be for the state to say to have to prove the opposite. But that's a different set of issues which would apply to all LGBT asylum seekers who are claiming asylum on the grounds of their sexuality. But for human rights defenders, those who've got a public record in this space, absolutely, we should be enabling them to enjoy the protection available from the United Kingdom if it's required. But of course, most of all, we've got to enable them to continue the very great work that they are doing for their own countries, in their own countries, if possible. If they judge that's not possible, then we need to support them here.
Nice. Yeah, definitely like that. I'm going to now throw it open to the floor. So in the way that these magical conferences work, I'm expecting some questions just to pop up, and I'm going to throw them towards you. So let's have a look and see in our chat if anything is in just yet. Let's have a look. Okay, I've not got anything in just yet, so I'm going to ask. Oh, no, we do. I lie. Okay, here we go. First one. Right, I'm going to go to Baroness Barker on this. Do you think that the potential rollbacks on LGBT rights in the UK will impact the UK's ability to continue its role as a global leader on LGBT rights?
Yeah. Yeah, I do. I think that we all know that what's in what the prospects are for GRA reform at the moment, and we also, I think we also know that from history that at any point the political tide could turn and we could find ourselves in a difficult place again, and people do look to the United Kingdom. Other countries look to the United Kingdom on these matters. One of the things that I did before the lockdown was we used to have lots and lots of parliamentarians coming into the UK Parliament from all around the world, and I would make it my business to meet with them. And usually we would have a session on equalities, and I would just deliberately throw in some stuff about the need for LGBT discrimination to stop, because discrimination is a very, very expensive thing to do. And one of the things that we have successfully done, and one of the things which our APPG is there to do more of, is to make not just the political but the economic and social case for LGBT rights. And so if the United Kingdom, which has been at the forefront of the fight for so long, moves backwards, then people who wish us harm across the world will take heart. So we've got to be vigilant.
Well, we've got to be very, very careful here. That we might believe that the propaganda that is then being put around about from people who understandably, like Liz, she's in a different political party from me, as are others who are active in this space. And they might have rather more exaggerated anxieties about what this Conservative government might do than those of us who are supporters of it. And but I would just, whilst we wait for the government to present its response to the consultation on the Gender Recognition Act, just ask oneself the question: is Boris Johnson going to want to be a prime minister that presides over any kind of setback to the establishment of delivery of LGBT plus rights in the United Kingdom? And the answer to that is plainly, obviously, no. He is going to want to take the agenda forward as any other leader of the United Kingdom would these days. There is, and I think we've got ourselves in a place where we've created a bit of anxiety because of a very vocal part of a social media debate that has created anxiety around the issue of trans rights. There are important steps forward to take for trans rights, and I am confident that this government will take them. And we're, like right at the last couple of weeks before we get to the place where the government's going to do its response on this consultation, there's plainly a whole bunch of anxiety kicking around. I'm confident the government is going to have the right answer that will bring satisfaction to the trans community and offer some reassurance around fears that have been stoked that frankly have no evidential base at all.
I think that's a really interesting answer. I think I'd love to get your thoughts as well on the fact that you say that Boris Johnson would want to kind of continue to be at the forefront of LGBT rights and pushing on. But I'm not sure if you saw my piece today about LGBT suicide during lockdown and the fears that some of these charities have around the fact that the action plan that Theresa May launched, and I was at the Garden Party in 2018, and when she launched it, she said, we're going to be pushing for these rights and this is what we're going to do. And ultimately, I found today that at least one section of that definitely hasn't been completed since Theresa May's government said bye. And I just wondered if there is a real need, or you're seeing that there is a push from Boris Johnson to actually stand up for LGBT rights.
Look, there are difficult issues here. This is a new administration. We've got a new Minister for Women and Equalities since Theresa May was in office. They're getting to grips with this issue, but the one thing they're not going to do, and would be appalled if it ended up the case, is for the agenda to, in any sense, go into reverse. Because Liz is absolutely right. That would send the most appalling signal about the administration. It would send a very negative signal about the Prime Minister personally, that he had allowed this to happen, and it would send a very depressing signal about our country and the fact that we claim global leadership on these issues. These are things we are not going to sacrifice likely. And when this debate is then properly considered around difficult and sometimes complex issues, particularly around trans rights, because gender is not the same as sexuality, and many politicians do not run across these issues in the day-to-day course of their lives, and they take a bit of thinking through. But in the end, and my concern is that there's been so much dark propaganda kicking around in this area that we have put the frighteners on the trans community. That's been the effect of this poisonous conversation that's gone on social media, and some of them would rather that the agenda got left exactly where it is, because at least it won't go backwards. Well, that's a terrible place for them to have got in terms of their mindset. I'm utterly determined that that is not going to be the case, and that we are going to significantly advance trans rights. We might not go absolutely as far as they as they would want and will do in the course of time, but I'm very confident that we will see things continuing to move forward in the UK, and for the UK being able to continue to claim a position of international leadership on LGBT plus rights. We're not going to sacrifice that lightly.
Thank you. Really appreciate that. Okay. I'm going to have a look. Okay, we're going to actually pass to our human rights defenders now. So thank you both for that. Let's jump to some Q&A for Magdalena and Katsiaryna. Let's have a look. Are they back? Let's see. Okay, Magda, are you there?
Yeah, I'm here.
Hello. Okay, so first question is for you. You mentioned Elżbieta earlier. She was on the Pride Inside panel on LGBTI rights in Europe yesterday. Could you tell us a bit more about that, please?
About the case?
Yes.
Okay, so basically, one of the things that's going on in Poland is the strategy of portraying LGBT people as, against people of faith. And that means that LGBT people are portrayed as against the church. And each time there is something like an artistic action, and that was one of the action was when in Częstochowa, which is a very religious, symbolically very religious place, we have this icon of Virgin Mary, and there was a pride march there. So what people do, so this is both a symbol of pride march of Częstochowa. So one of the artists, what they did is kind of change this this icon into and color the halo around the head of Virgin Mary. So Elżbieta Podleśna was one of the people who wasn't an author of that poster, but she was, putting it on the streets when there was a Pride march. So after this, the police came to her door, knocked on her door very early in the morning, like 6 a.m., and basically they took her to jail. They detained her because apparently she was, offending religious beliefs. So we considered that to be an excessive force used by the police because, come on, like she should have been summoned by letter, probably. This is what normally is going on, but not like the police has been pounding on your door at 6 a.m. and taking you to interrogate you because he had posters of Virgin Mary with a halo in rainbow. So this was ridiculous, and this is one of the examples of really excessive force used.
Thank you. Okay, I'm going to ask a follow-up on that. Could you tell us a bit more about the LGBT movement in Poland and how you can organize, or how you organize? How does it all happen?
Okay. I've been an activist since 9 years now, and I think despite all of this hate and all of this persecution going on right now, I think a positive thing is that I've never seen a community being together as much. And what I mean by that is that 3 or 4 years ago, we maybe had Pride marches in maybe 4 or 5 bigger cities. Now we have around 40 Pride marches in smaller cities as well, because people, in response to all of these attacks, decided that they have to do something and that they have to come out and either do the Pride, but also we had this very spontaneous, so that was very interesting because it wasn't started by any of the organizations, but we had this social movement on Twitter last year in response to the homophobic activities by the authorities, when people just started coming out on Twitter saying, hey, I'm an LGBT myself, and I'm a firefighter, I work here and there, and I'm a normal person. So I'm not a pedophile, I'm not a I don't want to destroy your family. I'm just a regular person and I deserve the same rights. So I think this is how the community is more mobilized and more out. Definitely more people come out. So I think in all this negativity that we see, we also have very positive trends as well. And I would like to focus on the positive ones because it really, and be hopeful.
I like that a lot. Yeah, there's a lot of trauma in the world already. We need some positivity. I like that. I'm now going to ask Katsiaryna, let's have a look what your question is. Okay, here we go. In London, Pride is a huge commercial event which has the support of the mainstream media, politicians, and businesses. I bet it looks different in Belarus, is what the person says. If it wasn't for the pandemic, what would Pride in Belarus look like?
Well, it's actually a very, very good question. I love it. I have to probably notice that we had prides previously, starting from 2010 till 2015, but then we've been persecuted quite heavily, and all those who've been working on prides unfortunately left, or they changed their careers. I didn't. I mean, I was part of that movement, and now I'm part of the new wave of prides in Belarus. And our prides have never ever been a commercial. They always political, and they're always community driven, if you can say so. What I mean is, for example, Pride of this year is led mainly by civil activists, women rights activists, and just a couple of LGBT rights activists. So it's not purely driven by LGBT movement, but more by the civil society movement. And the idea of this this pride is actually to bring on board business owners, mainly those who hold some pubs or restaurants, and just together with us celebrate the diversity and recognition of our rights. So that's the aim of this pride, and we're very hopeful that owners will join us in that celebration. That was not the case for our previous prides. Our previous prides were very political. We had a very clear political, in terms of the rights, I mean, demands for the government. This time we are just trying to make a point that we are not on our own. We are supported by civil society heavily, and we are led by civil society, including LGBT activists, and we are supported by business. But of course, I'm not expecting the government to be on our side or any other parts of our society, be they media. You know, in Belarus we have two types of media, independent and dependent. So it's definitely not going to be as in London. And coming back on the point of COVID, I may sound quite scary, but we are going to march, actually, regardless of the pandemic. If you may know, unfortunately, our president doesn't recognize pandemic and didn't enforce any response into that. So people are actually on the streets and they're demonstrating. As I mentioned before, we have this political and civil unrest now, and thousands of people are demonstrating every single day. And we are going to demonstrate as well, of course, with certain precautions, and security and safety will be in the place. That's always a priority for us being active in such hostile environments. Thank you.
Thank you. And I'm actually going to stay with you for another question. So this one, we've got about 8 minutes before we end. So very quick answers on this. But staying with you, what would you like to say to anyone watching tonight who's feeling alone, thinking that they don't have a voice and that they can't make a difference where they are?
Magdalena? Oh,
I'll stay with you. Yeah. What would you say, Katsiaryna?
all right. Okay. So, gosh. I don't know. I mean, I'm speaking on behalf of a person who is trying to make a difference in a country that has no perspective for any change whatsoever in any time soon. And I am driven by that, actually. I'm driven by the fact that the reality is so terrible in my country and many others, like Russia or Azerbaijan or Uzbekistan, for LGBT people. And I can't just stay still. I mean, someone has to do that. Someone has to learn from my mistakes. And from my sort of achievements. So I'm actually motivated by the fact that I won't probably see my change or change that I'm contributing to. And you also have to be motivated by those who are struggling to do any change in a very, very hostile environment. So that would be my message.
Okay, thank you for that. That was a nice one. And over to Magdalena.
Same question?
Yes, please. What would you say to someone who is sat at home watching this thinking, I don't have a voice, I can't make change, what can I do?
I mean, you can do change by going, and in case of Poland especially, by going to the presidential elections and voting for those people who are not using hate speech. You can do very small things, you know, show support, talk to your friends about issues. If you hear somebody joking about gays, then tell them you're not comfortable with that, and this also changes something. So I would say, like, we don't have to come up with a specific action plan to change the whole world, because we are only capable of changing whatever we have control over, and we won't have control over the government in case of Poland, certainly, but we can bring hope to people. We can stay positive and try to be supportive, and I don't know, whatever you are, try to create a safe space and tell people, and definitely react to jokes, to those microaggressions, so all those little things that may make somebody else uncomfortable, but also, especially in Poland, react to violence in the street, because it's also happening.
Thank you so much. Okay, well, thank you both of you. I'm going to say goodbye to you now. So thank you for your time. Really appreciate it. Some awesome answers there. Look out for my documentary next week on LGBT rights in Poland. And
Sure,
yes, thank you both. Also, I'm going to bring back the parliamentarians now and say thank you to them as well for their time. Thank you so much to Crispin Blunt MP, and thank you to Baroness Barker as well for those awesome answers. And I know you're going to be pushing on with things in Parliament and trying to make change there. So thank you for both of you. Oh, you're with me. Thank you both for your time.
Thank you.
Pleasure to be here.
You're so welcome. Thank you. And before we do leave the rest of you, our audience, would like to highlight one of the many human rights defenders that Amnesty works with, who they will be asking you to take action for over Pride Inside. Magdalena's already mentioned her case, but Elżbieta is an incredible activist standing up for LGBT rights in Poland. And like many others, has paid a high personal price for doing so. The Amnesty team would like you to take action for her on the website and check out the panel discussion which took place yesterday. It's there for you to watch. Right, well, we've actually made it to the end. That is it. So you can follow the work of the APPG on social media or through their website, and Amnesty in the link below. Thank you once again to all of our incredible panelists. You can find me on social media at BenInLDN. Drop me an email if you've got something to say. Thank you, Max, for doing everything you're doing. And that is that. Thank you and good night.